when the HOA president ordered me to move my eyesore truck from my own street, she had no idea she was about to learn the most expensive lesson of her life. Picture this. I'm standing in my driveway at 7 a.m., still in my work boots from yesterday's electrical job, staring at a bright orange violation notice flapping in the October wind like some kind of surrender flag. The diesel smell from my F-250 mixes with the crisp autumn air as I read the most ridiculous fine I've ever seen. Commercial vehicles prohibited per CCNR Section 7.3. $50. Escalating to $100 weekly if I don't comply. But here's what Brenda Thornfield didn't know when she slapped that notice on my windshield, and trust me, this gets good. My grandfather didn't just live on Willowbrook Lane. He owns the whole damn street. What would you do if your HOA tried to control property they don't even own? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I bet your HOA has some wild stories too. Let me back up and tell you how this whole mess started. My name's Marcus Kellerman, and I'm a third-generation electrician who recently inherited my grandfather's 1,940 Craftsman house in Willowbrook Estates. You know the type of neighborhood. Upper-middle-class suburb where the lawns are measured with rulers and the mailboxes cost more than most people's cars. I drive a 2015 Ford F-250 work truck. It's perfectly maintained, passes inspection every year, and frankly looks better than half the luxury SUVs parked in these driveways. But it's obviously a work vehicle, complete with ladder racks and the occasional electrical supply box visible through the rear window. Now, Willowbrook Estates is one of those places with a split personality. The original families, teachers, postal workers, electricians like my grandfather, built solid middle-class lives here in the 60s and 70s. Then the tech boom brought in a wave of newcomers with expensive tastes and even more expensive attitudes. Enter Brenda Thornfield. Brenda's 48, sells real estate for the luxury market, and moved here 5 years ago from a downtown condo that probably cost more than most people's houses. She drives a white BMW X5 that she washes twice a week, maintains a lawn so perfect it looks like AstroTurf, and has been HOA president for 3 years running. The woman measures grass height with an actual ruler. I've seen her timing people's Christmas decorations to make sure they come down by January 2nd. She's that neighbor. The trouble started on a Tuesday. I'd just finished a 12-hour job rewiring an old warehouse, the kind of honest work that keeps the lights on in this country, and parked my truck in my own driveway like I'd done 100 times before. Next morning, there it was, that orange violation notice, crackling in the wind like a declaration of war. Commercial vehicles prohibited per CC&R Section 7.3. First violation, $50, 0 cents. Subsequent violations, $100, 0 cents. Weekly, 10-day compliance deadline. I stood there in my driveway, coffee mug in hand, listening to Mrs. Patterson's wind chimes tinkling next door, and I felt something I hadn't felt since my wife passed 3 years ago. Pure, undiluted fury. That evening, I knocked on Brenda's door. She answered through the screen, wouldn't even open it fully, as if my work boots might contaminate her marble foyer. "Rules are rules, Mr. Kellerman," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone people use when they think they hold all the cards. "This isn't a construction zone." I explained that I was just trying to make a living, that the truck was my livelihood. Her response, "Maybe you should consider a more appropriate neighborhood." The smell of her vanilla candles drifted through the screen door, mixing with the evening air thick with the promise of rain. I could hear the click of her designer heels on that marble floor as she stepped back, already dismissing me. That's when I knew this wasn't really about parking regulations or neighborhood aesthetics. This was about class, about who belonged and who didn't, about a woman who'd lived here 5 minutes thinking she could erase 75 years of my family's history. See, here's what Brenda didn't bother to research before starting her little power trip. My grandfather, Thomas Kellerman, bought his lot in 1947 when this was nothing but farmland and a dream. He was a master electrician who helped wire half the original houses in this neighborhood. My father grew up here, learned the trade here, raised me here. This wasn't just my house. This was my legacy. But Brenda was about to learn that some legacies run deeper than HOA covenants. Much deeper. As I walked back to my house that night, the crunch of autumn leaves under my feet sounded like the opening notes of a song I was just beginning to hear. Brenda didn't waste time escalating. 2 days later, I found a formal letter in my mailbox. Not just any letter, but one of those certified mail jobs that screams legal trouble from 50 feet away. Final notice: commercial vehicle removal required within 48 hours. Additional violations noted: unsightly equipment visible in vehicle bed, work ladder. Failure to comply will result in property lien for unpaid fines. CC, HOA Board of Directors, Willowbrook Management Company. Unsightly equipment. My grandfather's old wooden ladder, the same one he'd used to wire this entire neighborhood, was now unsightly equipment. I'll tell you what's unsightly: a grown woman with nothing better to do than patrol the streets with a clipboard and a superiority complex. But here's the thing about being an electrician: you learn to troubleshoot problems methodically. So instead of losing my temper, I decided to do some research. First stop, the county recorder's office, where property records tell stories that go back generations. The clerk, a patient woman named Dorothy who'd been there since the Carter administration, helped me pull the files. My grandfather's original 1947 deed, thick with age and smelling like old paper and history. The HOA's 1995 incorporation documents, crisp and modern by comparison. That's when I noticed the first discrepancy. The street ownership description in the HOA documents didn't quite match what I was seeing in the original development records. Interesting. Knowledge nugget 1. Always verify HOA authority by checking original property deeds at your county recorder's office. Many associations overstep their actual jurisdiction because no one bothers to verify their claims. While I was playing detective, Brenda was playing hardball. She called the non-emergency police line and had Officer Rodriguez come out to assess the commercial vehicle violation. Poor guy looked about as thrilled to be there as I felt receiving him. "Sir, this appears to be a civil matter," Rodriguez explained, his radio crackling in the afternoon heat. "I can't force vehicle removal based on HOA complaints. Your registration and insurance look good to me." Brenda appeared from her house like a spider sensing vibrations in her web. "Officer, surely there's something you can do. This is a residential neighborhood with standards." "Ma'am, unless the vehicle's abandoned, unregistered, or blocking traffic, my hands are tied. Maybe contact a towing company if your HOA has that authority." The word "if" hung in the air like smoke. Rodriguez tipped his hat and left, probably relieved to get back to real police work. That weekend, anonymous flyers appeared on every doorstep. "Keep our neighborhood beautiful. Report violations to maintain property values." No signature, but the expensive paper stock and perfect formatting screamed Brenda Thornfield. Then came the emergency HOA board meeting notice. To discuss ongoing compliance issues and community standards. Translation: let's gang up on the guy with the truck. The meeting was held in the community center, that beige monument to suburban bureaucracy with its fluorescent lighting that makes everyone look like they're dying of liver disease. 15 residents showed up, a decent turnout for what was essentially a public shaming. Brenda had prepared a slideshow, an actual PowerPoint presentation titled "Protecting Property Values Through Enforcement." She'd photographed my truck from every unflattering angle and placed these images next to stock photos of luxury neighborhoods, complete with circular driveways and 3-car garages. "Residents invest in Willowbrook Estates expecting certain standards," she announced, clicking through slides with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned her own authority. "Allowing commercial vehicles opens the door to further deterioration." When she finished, I stood up. The coffee in the room had gone cold hours ago, and the industrial carpet gave off that particular smell of community centers everywhere. Industrial cleaning solution mixed with resignation. "I'd like 3 minutes to respond." Brenda checked her phone with obvious irritation. 3 minutes, and please keep it brief." I pulled out a folder I'd prepared. My grandfather, Thomas Kellerman, was a World War II veteran who helped build this neighborhood from the ground up. Literally. He wired the electrical systems in half these houses, including yours, Mrs. Thornfield. A few heads nodded. The older residents remembered. "I'm offering a compromise. I'll park the truck in my garage whenever possible, but I won't be driven from my family's home by someone who's lived here 5 minutes." The board voted 3-2 against the compromise. Bank manager Williams and business owner Foster sided with Brenda. Only Mrs. Henderson, the retired teacher, and Mr. Kumar voted for reason. Daily monitoring will begin immediately, Brenda announced with poorly concealed satisfaction. Compliance will be enforced. As residents filed out, old Mrs. Patterson touched my arm. Your grandfather would be proud, she whispered. Don't let them win. The battle lines were drawn, but Brenda had no idea what she was really fighting. Brenda's daily monitoring turned out to be exactly what it sounded like, stalking with a clipboard. She drove by my house twice a day, taking time-stamped photos of my truck like some kind of suburban paparazzi. She even recruited Gladys Worthington from 2 streets over as her compliance monitor, a woman so bored with retirement that watching paint dry probably counts as entertainment. The harassment went professional when my work phone started ringing. Concerned residents calling to ask about my reliability and professionalism. One voice I recognized, Brenda's fake sweet real estate tone, suggested my clients might want to hire more appropriate services. That hit where it hurt. When you're self-employed, reputation is everything. And when Mrs. Goldman canceled a rewiring job because of neighborhood concerns, I knew Brenda had crossed a line from petty to predatory. Time for some counterintelligence. I installed security cameras facing the street. Perfectly legal since they only covered my own property. Within a week, I had Brenda's surveillance scheduled down to the minute. 7:15 AIE on her way to the gym. 6:30 p.m. returning from whatever real estate drama she'd stirred up that day. But neighbors started talking. Mrs. Patterson mentioned that her grandson was being hassled about his motorcycle. The young family 3 houses down revealed they were catching grief over their kids' playground equipment. Apparently the swing set wasn't architecturally consistent with neighborhood aesthetics. A secret Facebook group formed, Willowbrook Resistance. 12 neighbors sharing their own HOA horror stories. Turns out, Brenda's enforcement crusade was more widespread than anyone realized. Meanwhile, my research was paying dividends. Those 1947 development documents kept nagging at me. Something about the street ownership language didn't add up, but the real discovery came when I was documenting Brenda's own property for evidence. Her fence was 6 inches too high, according to the same CC&Rs she loved quoting. Her landscape lighting hadn't been approved by the architectural committee. Even her precious BMW was occasionally parked at an angle that violated the orderly appearance clause. Funny how enforcement works when you're the enforcer. Knowledge nugget. 2. Zoning laws supersede HOA rules. If county compliance contradicts association restrictions, county wins every time. Check with your local zoning office before accepting HOA ultimatums. Brenda's next move was filing a formal complaint with county code enforcement, claiming my truck violated residential zoning. She demanded immediate enforcement action, probably expecting the county to do her dirty work. The inspector who showed up was a guy named Pete Martinez who'd been checking commercial vehicle complaints for 15 years. He walked around my truck, checked the registration, measured the wheelbase, and shook his head. No zoning violations here, he told me while Brenda hovered nearby like a vulture. Vehicles properly registered, under weight limits, and parked on private property. Your HOA lady doesn't understand the difference between their rules and actual law. But Brenda wasn't giving up. 2 mornings in a row, I found my truck tires deflated, not slashed, deflated. Someone with just enough sense to avoid felony vandalism, but not enough sense to avoid my security cameras. The footage showed a figure in dark clothing creeping around my driveway at 3 a.m. Too dark to make a positive ID, but the timing coincided perfectly with Brenda's surveillance schedule. When I filed a police report, Officer Rodriguez suggested it was probably just a neighborly dispute and recommended I work things out civilly. Civil, right. The emergency HOA meeting that followed was Brenda's attempt at a knockout punch. She proposed new rules allowing immediate towing of non-compliant vehicles, suggested hiring private security patrols, and recommended a special assessment to fund enhanced enforcement. We need to send a clear message, she announced to the packed room, the smell of burned coffee mixing with the tension thick enough to cut with a wire stripper. Standards matter. Property values matter. Some people clearly need stronger motivation to comply. That's when my lawyer friend Jake called with interesting news from his own research. He'd been digging into original street dedication documents, the legal paperwork that determines who actually owns what in residential developments. "Marcus, you need to see this," he said, his voice carrying that particular excitement lawyers get when they find a smoking gun. "I've been looking at the 1947 development agreements, and there's something weird about Willowbrook Lane." "Weird how?" "Weird like your grandfather didn't just buy a lot on the street. According to these documents, he helped finance the street construction itself. And Marcus, I don't think the street was ever properly deeded to the municipality." The taste of stale community center coffee suddenly got a lot more interesting. "What are you saying, Jake?" "I'm saying we need to do a complete title search, because if I'm reading this right, your HOA has been issuing parking violations on a street they don't control." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as the implications hit me. Brenda's little enforcement empire might be built on a foundation of legal quicksand. The HOA board voted for immediate enforcement at their next meeting at 3-2, same split as before. Brenda hired a private towing company on retainer and posted shiny new signs throughout the neighborhood. "Unauthorized vehicles will be towed at owner's expense." The certified letter that followed had all the warmth of a tax audit. "Final notice, 24-hour compliance deadline. Failure to remove commercial vehicle will result in immediate towing and maximum fines." They came at dawn. I heard the diesel rumble of the tow truck at 6 a.m. and stumbled outside in my bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, to find a guy with "Rick's Recovery" embroidered on his shirt, hooking chains to my F-250. "Morning," I said, surprisingly calm for someone watching their livelihood get hijacked. "Mind if I see your authorization?" Rick, a decent guy just doing his job, showed me Brenda's signed towing order. I pulled out my phone and started filming. Something about being recorded made Rick nervous. "Look, buddy, I'm just following orders here," he said, unsnapping the chains. "But maybe I should call my boss real quick." While Rick was on the phone, Brenda appeared from her house like she'd been watching through the curtains, which she probably had. "Is there a problem?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "No problem," I replied, still filming, "just documenting everything for my attorney." Rick hung up and shook his head. "Boss says to leave it alone for now. Too many questions about jurisdiction." The word jurisdiction hit Brenda like cold water. For the first time since this whole mess started, I saw doubt flicker across her face. But if Brenda was good at anything, it was doubling down on bad decisions. That afternoon, she posted on the neighborhood Facebook group with photos of my truck and the caption, "Rules for everyone else? Some residents think they're above community standards." The post exploded. Supporters praised her dedication to excellence. Critics pointed out that her own property had violations. The comment thread turned into a digital version of the Hatfields and McCoys. I kept my mouth shut and kept building my case. Every harassment incident documented, every threatening letter filed, every neighbor's story of selective enforcement carefully recorded. Jake's surveyor friend, Tom Brennan, offered to do a professional property assessment for free. Tom had been surveying residential developments for 25 years and knew exactly what to look for. "Holy shit, Marcus," he said after 3 hours with his equipment, studying maps that looked like mathematical spiderwebs. "The boundaries in these modern HOA maps don't match the original deed records at all, not even close." Knowledge nugget 3. Property surveys can reveal easement rights and ownership boundaries that override HOA authority. Many associations operate on assumptions rather than actual legal documentation. The Willowbrook Resistance Facebook group was growing. 23 members sharing stories of Brenda's enforcement campaigns. Countergroup formed. Maintain Our Standards, with exactly 8 members, 7 of whom seemed to be Brenda, posting under different names. The neighborhood barbecue that weekend felt like a peace summit in a war zone. Longtime residents clustered around the grills, shooting nervous glances at the newer families who huddled near the gazebo. Kids played together like nothing was wrong, but their parents were choosing sides. Brenda's overreach hit new heights when she demanded I remove all commercial materials from my property. This included basic tools, work boots I'd left on the porch to dry, and electrical supply boxes I kept in my garage. "Your property has become a de facto commercial operation," her latest letter declared. "Daily fines will apply until full compliance is achieved." She was claiming neighbor complaints about constant traffic, which was ridiculous since I work on site at client locations, not from home. That's when Jake called with the bombshell. "Marcus, sit down for this one," he said, his voice tight with excitement. "I found the original 1947 development agreement in the state archives. Your grandfather didn't just fund street construction. He retained ownership rights. Willowbrook Lane was never actually deeded to the municipality. The words hit like lightning. What does that mean? It means the current public street isn't public at all. The city accepted maintenance responsibility through a separate agreement, but ownership never transferred. According to these documents, you inherited more than just your grandfather's house. How much more? Marcus, you own 847 feet of residential roadway. The entire length of Willowbrook Lane belongs to you. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the security camera monitor showing Brenda's evening surveillance drive, and felt the world shift beneath my feet. Every parking violation, every harassment campaign, every threat, all of it happening on property I owned. The smell of rain drifted through my open window, mixing with the distant sound of kids playing in the street. My street. Brenda's little enforcement empire was about to discover what actual authority looked like. The document spread across Jake's conference table told a story that would make Brenda's head spin. Original 1947 development agreement, municipal maintenance contract, property surveys spanning 7 decades, and there, in grandfather's careful handwriting, the signature that changed everything. Thomas Kellerman, developer and primary financier, Willowbrook Lane construction project. My grandfather hadn't just bought a house in a new neighborhood. He'd bankrolled the entire street construction, retaining permanent ownership while allowing the municipality to handle maintenance through a separate service agreement. "This is incredible," Jake said, adjusting his reading glasses for the 3rd time. The city assumed ownership based on their maintenance responsibilities, but legally, the street never transferred. It's been sitting in your family for 78 years. The implications hit like dominoes falling. Every HOA parking restriction on Willowbrook Lane was legally meaningless. Every violation notice Brenda had issued was harassment, not enforcement. Every threat about towing was intimidation based on authority she didn't possess. I owned the street. Not just my driveway, not just my property line, the entire 847 feet of asphalt where this whole battle was being fought. Jake, what does this mean for all the fines and threats? Legally unenforceable. The HOA's jurisdiction extends to individual properties, not the street itself. Brenda's been issuing parking tickets in your driveway, essentially. The emotional weight was overwhelming. Vindication mixed with responsibility. My grandfather's legacy was bigger than I'd ever imagined, but now I understood why he'd fought so hard to build something lasting here. We verified everything twice. Municipal Legal Department confirmed the oversight. 78 years of administrative assumption without actual ownership transfer. City records showed maintenance agreements but no deed transfer. The HOA had never bothered to verify their authority because nobody had ever challenged it. "Why keep this quiet for now?" I asked. Jake leaned back in his leather chair, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the legal documents. "Because revelation timing matters. Let them keep digging their hole deeper. Document every bit of harassment. When we drop this bomb, we want maximum impact and bulletproof legal protection." The power dynamic had completely flipped. I wasn't a defensive victim anymore. I was the ultimate authority over the neighborhood's main thoroughfare. Every car, every visitor, every delivery truck operated on my property with my implicit permission. But more than that, I held the key to Brenda's credibility. When this truth emerged, her entire enforcement campaign would be exposed as elaborate harassment based on non-existent authority. The strategic implications were staggering. I could legally authorize any parking on my street. I could restrict access if I wanted. Hell, I could probably charge parking fees if I felt vindictive. But that wasn't the point. This was about justice, not revenge. "How do we handle the revelation?" I asked. "Carefully. Build an ironclad case first. Document every harassment incident since day one. Calculate financial damages, lost work, legal fees, stress, costs. Then, we choose the perfect moment for maximum community impact." That night, I stood in my driveway looking down Willowbrook Lane with completely different eyes. The street lamps grandfather had probably helped plan. The sidewalks he'd watched children play on for decades. The trees he'd seen grow from saplings to the mature oaks that now filtered moonlight across the asphalt. This wasn't just about parking violations anymore. This was about protecting a community legacy that Brenda's petty tyranny threatened to destroy. The security cameras captured her evening surveillance drive right on schedule. She had no idea she was trespassing on my property, documenting her own harassment campaign, building the case that would eventually destroy her credibility. Tomorrow, I'd start planning the revelation, but tonight I'd honor my grandfather's memory by doing what he'd always done, protecting this neighborhood from people who mistook authority for wisdom. The October wind rustled through the oaks he'd planted, carrying the sound of children's laughter from houses he'd helped electrify, in a community he'd helped build. A community I now had the power to protect. Building a bulletproof case required the right team, and I was lucky enough to have friends who understood both justice and expertise. Jake Sterling took the case pro bono, partly because we'd been friends since high school, mostly because he'd never seen a property rights case this clear-cut. Tom Brennan, the surveyor, confirmed every measurement and boundary with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Marcus, in 25 years of residential surveys, I've never seen documentation this ironclad, he said, adjusting his transit equipment in my front yard. Your grandfather was meticulous about legal protections. Mr. Patterson from next door revealed 40 years of postal service experience had taught him plenty about property law and neighborhood politics. I delivered mail to your grandfather for 15 years, he told me over coffee that smelled like morning possibilities. Tom always said this street was special. Now I know why. Mrs. McCarthy, the retired librarian with silver hair and steel determination, offered research assistance with historical documents. Honey, I've been organizing records since the Nixon administration. Let me help you find everything Brenda wishes had stayed buried. Our legal strategy was methodical as rewiring a house. Document every HOA violation and threat since the truck incident. Calculate financial damages, lost work time, $2,400, 0 cents. Legal consultation fees, $800, 0 cents. And stress costs, priceless but legally quantifiable. Jake prepared cease and desist letters for the harassment campaign, drafted formal notification of street ownership to the municipality, and researched precedent cases for similar property disputes. Evidence collection became a full-time job. Security camera footage of every surveillance visit. Brenda had been recorded 47 times in 6 weeks. Screenshots of Facebook harassment posts with timestamps showing coordinated attacks. Phone recordings of threatening conversations, perfectly legal in our state, including Brenda's memorable line about making me comply whether I liked it or not. Neighbor witness statements painted a picture of systematic intimidation that went far beyond parking violations. Financial Nugget 1. Private street ownership can include mineral rights, utility easements, and parking authority. Always verify what comes with property inheritance because previous generations often secured more rights than modern owners realize. The Willowbrook resistance evolved into a formal information network. Neighbors reported on HOA board meetings, shared details of other enforcement campaigns, and revealed information about Brenda's past legal troubles in her previous neighborhood. Apparently, she'd been sued twice for harassment before moving here. Mrs. Patterson's grandson, visiting from law school, provided research assistance on HOA overreach cases. Aunt Helen, this is a textbook example of ultra-virus action, beyond legal authority, he explained. The HOA has been operating completely outside their jurisdiction. Tom's professional survey ordered for legal documentation cost $1,200, 0 cents, but was worth every penny. Historical research at state archives revealed the complete deed chain, proving unbroken ownership from grandfather to father to me. We attended municipal meetings to understand street maintenance agreements, discovering that city crews had been maintaining my street for decades without realizing they didn't own it. The Parks and Recreation Director laughed when Jake explained the situation. Happens more often than you'd think. Private streets that everyone assumes are public. Legal nugget 4. Street dedication versus street ownership. Many private streets were never properly transferred to public control, creating situations where HOAs enforce rules on property they don't control. County recorders' offices maintain the truth. Timing strategy became crucial. We planned the revelation for maximum HOA board attendance, coordinated with Jenny Rodriguez, a local reporter who happened to be Officer Rodriguez's daughter and was always looking for human interest stories about community disputes. The community impact needed careful consideration. Peak neighborhood activity meant weekend revelation when families were home. Seasonal timing mattered too. October meant people were outside, engaged, paying attention to neighborhood dynamics. My psychological preparation involved practicing key talking points with Jake, anticipating Brenda's likely responses, denial, deflection, desperation, and preparing for the community division that truth-telling sometimes requires. Marcus, when you drop this bomb, some people will feel embarrassed about supporting harassment, Jake warned. Others will double down rather than admit they were wrong. Be ready for both reactions. Documentation organization filled 3 large binders: chronological timeline of harassment incidents, legal precedent research for similar cases, financial impact statements with supporting evidence, and positive community improvement proposals ready for immediate presentation. The smell of fresh ink from legal document copies mixed with the satisfaction of methodical preparation. The sound of our 3-hole punch organizing evidence became the rhythm of justice being assembled, page by page, fact by fact. When I found the original photographs of grandfather supervising street construction in 1947, him in overalls and work boots, standing proud beside the surveying equipment, I knew we were ready. The taste of celebration wine that night carried hints of vindication and responsibility. Tomorrow we'd begin the final phase, but tonight, we'd assembled everything needed to protect this community from petty tyranny. Justice, it turns out, requires excellent filing systems. Brenda's desperation began showing when she discovered I'd been consulting with an attorney. Somehow, probably through her real estate network, she learned about my visits to Jake's office and interpreted legal research as an aggressive litigation threat. The emergency HOA board meeting she called violated their own bylaws about proper notice, but Brenda was past caring about rules that didn't serve her purposes. She proposed an immediate special assessment of $500, 0 cents per household, to fund legal defense against frivolous lawsuits. "We're under attack," she announced to the 7 residents who showed up on Tuesday afternoon, most of them retirees who had nothing better to do. "Some people think they can intimidate this board with lawyer threats. We need to show them that Willowbrook stands united." The irony was delicious. Brenda talking about intimidation while proposing to tax the neighborhood for her personal vendetta. Her smear campaign kicked into overdrive. She spread rumors about my lawsuit threats, claiming I was trying to destroy neighborhood property values through aggressive litigation. She suggested I was planning to convert my property to commercial use. Apparently my work truck was just the beginning of some grand scheme to turn Willowbrook into an industrial park. When she contacted the local newspaper with her one-sided story, I knew she'd moved from harassment into full desperation mode. Meanwhile, I continued normal routines while building my bulletproof case. Every morning, I let Brenda dig her hole deeper with increasingly erratic behavior. Every new harassment incident got documented with the precision of an electrical schematic. The sabotage escalated too. My mailbox got mysteriously damaged overnight. Not destroyed, just damaged enough to require replacement. Someone cut my garden hose, flooding my driveway and killing the grass I'd spent 3 years nurturing. Anonymous complaints got filed with multiple city departments. Building code violations, non-violations, even a health department complaint about unsanitary conditions. Inspector found my property cleaner than most. Inspector Perchos had my cleaner emergency process his prior to the party's meeting. Each incident was carefully documented with security footage, timestamps, and witness statements. Brenda was building my harassment case better than any lawyer could. Her power grab at the next board meeting was breathtaking in its overreach. She attempted to expand HOA authority through emergency rule changes, proposing new violations for disruptive behavior and community discord, terms so vague they could target anyone who disagreed with her. She tried recruiting new board members who supported strict enforcement, scheduling votes during weekday working hours when most reasonable residents couldn't attend. The bank manager and business owner who'd supported her before started looking uncomfortable with her increasingly authoritarian tactics. The community fracture was becoming impossible to ignore. Willowbrook had split into 2 distinct camps, longtime residents increasingly supporting me, newer residents torn between avoiding conflict and maintaining their property values, and several families seriously considering moving rather than dealing with the toxic atmosphere. "This used to be such a nice neighborhood," Mrs. Patterson told me while we watched Brenda drive by for her evening surveillance run. "Now people cross the street to avoid taking sides." Brenda's legal maneuvering revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of actual authority. She consulted with the HOA's attorney about removing problem residents, received proper advice about enforcement procedures and jurisdiction verification, then completely ignored the guidance in favor of more aggressive tactics. Any twist, when Brenda filed a formal police complaint claiming I was harassing her with security cameras, Officer Rodriguez had to explain that cameras pointing at my own property were perfectly legal. Ma'am, he's documenting activity on his own driveway. That's not harassment, that's evidence collection. My growing support network organized neighborhood watch volunteers to monitor additional sabotage attempts. The informal security network protecting other targeted residents showed community solidarity, building against HOA overreach. Jake advised that timing was right for revelation. All documentation was organized and legally vetted. Community support was prepared for public disclosure. Our media contact was ready for the human interest story that would expose Brenda's harassment campaign. Marcus, she's given us everything we need, Jake said, reviewing the latest complaint filings. Excessive fines, property damage, workplace harassment, filing false police reports. This isn't civil enforcement anymore, this is persecution. The morning frost on my damaged mailbox caught October's sunlight like diamonds on evidence. The sound of water rushing from my cut garden hose had been replaced by the smell of fresh paint while repairing vandalism damage. The feel of supportive handshakes from neighbor allies reminded me this battle was bigger than one man's parking space. Brenda had pushed this conflict far beyond parking violations into something that threatened the entire community's peace. Her enforcement empire was about to discover that real authority doesn't come from intimidation, it comes from law. And I held legal title to everything she'd been trying to control. Brenda's final gambit was as desperate as it was revealing. She organized a petition to remove the problem resident, canvassing the neighborhood with inflammatory rhetoric that made her sound like she was running for dictator rather than HOA president. This is about more than parking, she told anyone who'd listen, clipboard in hand and that fake concerned expression she'd perfected. This is about whether we're going to let one person destroy everything we've built here. Everything we've built. The woman who'd lived here 5 minutes was claiming credit for 75 years of community development. She threatened to resign as HOA president if the board couldn't control the Marcus situation, as if I were some kind of natural disaster rather than a guy trying to park his truck in his own driveway. When the local newspaper ran her story under the headline, HOA battles resident over neighborhood standards, complete with unflattering photos of my F-2050, I knew she'd crossed her final line. The article was pure propaganda, painting me as some kind of property value terrorist threatening suburban paradise. My response to reporter Jenny Rodriguez was brief and dignified. I'm reviewing all legal options and expect some surprising developments soon. I maintained professional composure despite every instinct screaming to unleash the truth right then and there. But Brenda wasn't done. Her pressure campaign targeted my employer with complaints about having an unprofessional employee who was disrupting residential communities. She spread rumors about property value impacts, suggesting other residents should protect their investments by supporting whatever measures were necessary to remove me. The packed community center for that Thursday night meeting felt like the climax of a neighborhood civil war. 40-plus residents crammed into folding chairs, the air thick with tension and the smell of burnt coffee that had been sitting too long. Brenda's presentation was her masterpiece of manipulation. Case against neighborhood disruption ran for 20 minutes, complete with photos, complaint documentation, and testimonials from concerned residents about the commercial vehicle crisis. She called for a formal vote to pursue all legal remedies against non-compliant residents, essentially asking the community to authorize warfare against me. I intended, but didn't defend myself. Not yet. I took careful notes on every accusation and threat, observed which residents supported reasonable discussion versus blind enforcement, and allowed Brenda to fully commit to her aggressive position. Jake sat in the back as my legal observer, documenting threats and harassment statements while recording the meeting with proper consent notifications. He identified potential witnesses for our upcoming revelation and made notes about Brenda's increasingly unhinged rhetoric. Mini twist. The turning point came when Brenda made her ultimate threat. If Marcus Kellerman won't comply voluntarily, we'll make him comply through whatever means necessary. Some people only understand force. The room went silent. Even her supporters looked uncomfortable with language that sounded more like extortion than community governance. Behind the scenes, our final preparations were falling into place. Legal documents were prepared for immediate filing. Media strategy was refined with Jenny Rodriguez, who'd started asking her own questions about HOA authority after Brenda's heavy-handed media manipulation. Community presentation materials were professionally prepared, and timing was coordinated with municipal notification requirements. "Marcus, she's threatening coordinated harassment," Jake whispered during a break. "Hiring private investigators to find violations, suggesting organized pressure campaigns. She's crossed from civil dispute into criminal conspiracy territory." Brenda's proposal for hiring a private investigator to document all violations on the Kellerman property was the final straw. She was suggesting using HOA funds to finance stalking, essentially. "We need to protect our investment," she declared to the increasingly uncomfortable crowd. "Property values don't protect themselves. Sometimes you have to fight for what's right." Fight. There was that word again, as if parking a work truck in my own driveway was some kind of declaration of war against suburban civilization. I realized the community needed protection from this escalating madness more than I needed personal vindication. Brenda's harassment campaign was poisoning relationships between neighbors who'd lived peacefully together for decades. The stuffy air in the overcrowded community center carried the sound of angry murmurs during Brenda's presentation. Bright camera flashes from Jenny Rodriguez's photographer illuminated faces twisted by artificial conflict. The tension-filled silence during my restrained responses felt like the calm before a hurricane. Walking home that night, I made the final decision. Justice delayed was community peace denied. Brenda's enforcement empire needed to end before it destroyed relationships that had taken generations to build. Next week's regularly scheduled HOA meeting would feature a revelation that would change everything. Not just for Brenda, not just for me, but for every resident who'd been intimidated into silence by petty tyranny masquerading as community standards. The October wind carried the scent of coming rain and the promise of truth finally told. The regularly scheduled HOA meeting that Tuesday night drew the biggest crowd in Willowbrook history. Word had spread about significant developments in the Kellerman situation, and 60-plus residents packed the community center like they were expecting either a resolution or a riot. I'd requested formal agenda time through proper channels. No emergency meetings or procedural tricks, just honest community discourse. Jake sat in his usual spot as legal observer, folder thick with documents at his side. Jenny Rodriguez had positioned herself near the front, camera ready for what I'd promised would be a significant neighborhood development. Brenda arrived with a prepared victory speech, radiating the confidence of someone convinced they held all the winning cards. The board members seemed equally certain about their final resolution to the Marcus problem. I entered quietly, carrying only a simple manila folder. "Before we address new business," Brenda announced with theatrical authority, "I'm presenting a formal motion to pursue all legal remedies against residents who refuse to comply with community standards." She read her list of my alleged violations like a prosecutor delivering closing arguments: commercial vehicle parking, unsightly equipment display, disruptive behavior, community discord. Each accusation was accompanied by photos and documentation that she believed proved her case beyond doubt. "The board demands immediate compliance, or will pursue forced property sale through lien foreclosure," she declared to murmurs of approval from her supporters. "I'm calling for a community vote supporting aggressive legal action." When she finished, the room buzzed with expectation. This was my moment to grovel, compromise, or storm out in defeat. Instead, I stood and requested permission to address her accusations. "I've learned something interesting about our neighborhood while researching these violations," I began calmly, feeling the weight of 3 generations of family history behind my words. "Something that changes everything we think we know about authority here." I opened the manila folder and produced the original 1947 development agreement. The paper yellowed with age, but the legal language still crystal clear. "My grandfather didn't just live on Willowbrook Lane," I continued, holding up the document. "According to these county records, Thomas Kellerman financed and owns the entire street." The silence that followed was absolute. 60 people holding their breath while my words sank in. Brenda's face drained of color like someone had pulled a plug. Board members exchanged confused glances that said everything about their lack of due diligence. Every parking violation you've issued, I continued, every threat you've made, every fine you've demanded, all of it happened on property that belongs to me. Jake stepped forward with professional survey results. Legal documentation confirms private ownership of the entire roadway. Municipal records verify 78 years of administrative oversight without actual ownership transfer. The municipal records officer I had invited as a guest witness nodded his confirmation. The city maintains the street through a service agreement, but we've never held title to the property itself. Mic drop, Mrs. Thornfield. You've been issuing parking tickets in my driveway. Brenda's desperate response was pure denial mixed with conspiracy theory. This is impossible. The HOA controls street parking. These documents must be fake. This is some kind of municipal conspiracy. She demanded to examine the fraudulent papers, claimed I'd somehow fabricated county records going back 78 years, and threatened to fight this fraud in court with every resource available. The community reaction split the room like lightning. Longtime residents who remembered my grandfather burst into applause. Brenda's supporters sat in shocked silence, processing the implications. Board members requested an emergency recess to consult with legal counsel. Jenny Rodriguez frantically scribbled notes while her photographer captured Brenda's meltdown for posterity. Jake announced the immediate consequences: cease and desist letters for all harassment activities, formal disputes of every HOA fine and violation, documentation of the harassment campaign for potential civil action, and transfer of street parking authority to its rightful owner. But my response wasn't about revenge, it was about healing. I'm not interested in vindictive enforcement, I told the stunned crowd. I want to work with reasonable neighbors to establish fair parking guidelines that serve everyone's needs. This community deserves better than harassment disguised as governance. I invited collaborative discussion about genuine community standards, proposed regular forums for addressing neighborhood concerns, and offered to help reform HOA procedures to prevent future overreach. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Brenda stormed out without speaking, her enforcement empire crumbling in real time. 3 board members submitted immediate resignations, probably realizing they'd been complicit in harassment based on non-existent authority. Neighbors approached with apologies, support, and relief that the toxic atmosphere could finally end. Jenny Rodriguez interviewed multiple residents for her follow-up story, capturing a community ready to heal from months of artificial conflict. The squeaky microphone feedback during my revelation seemed like the sound of truth breaking through years of assumed authority, the warm feeling of vindication mixed with genuine responsibility for protecting this community my grandfather had helped build. Within 48 hours, Brenda Thornfield resigned as HOA president, citing personal reasons and irreconcilable differences with neighborhood direction. Within 3 months, her white BMW X5 was gone, the for sale sign on her lawn attracting buyers who probably had no idea they were purchasing the former headquarters of a failed enforcement empire. The new HOA board, elected with my input and overwhelming community support, reformed governance procedures to prevent future overreach. Mrs. Henderson, the retired teacher who'd been the lone voice of reason during the original board votes, became president. Mr. Kumar, the bank manager who'd finally found his conscience, helped establish transparent financial oversight. All previous violations and fines were officially voided. Not just mine, but every petty enforcement action Brenda had pursued during her 3-year reign of clipboard terror. I organized a neighborhood barbecue on my street that weekend, establishing reasonable parking guidelines through actual consensus rather than dictatorial decree. We created a community garden in the unused space at the street's end, where kids could learn about growing things instead of being measured for grass height violations. The Positive Initiative, the annual Willowbrook Heritage Festival celebrating neighborhood history, became our signature event, drawing visitors from surrounding communities who wanted to see how neighbors could work together instead of against each other. Municipality formally acknowledged my street ownership through updated records, establishing a new maintenance agreement that protected residents' interests while recognizing actual property rights. The HOA reformed completely, focusing on genuine community building rather than enforcement for its own sake. Financial nugget 2. My grandfather's deed included mineral rights that could potentially be valuable if the area ever develops oil or gas resources. Always research the full scope of inherited property rights, because previous generations often secured more than modern owners realize. Personal growth came through understanding that victory without healing isn't really victory at all. I became the neighborhood's informal mediator, helping residents resolve disputes before they escalated into harassment campaigns. My electrical skills got put to good use helping elderly neighbors with home repairs, and the Kellerman Family Scholarship for trade school students honored grandfather's belief in honest work. My F-250 now sits proudly in the driveway without fear, a symbol of working-class dignity that no amount of suburban pretension can diminish. Property values actually increased due to positive media attention from Jenny Rodriguez's follow-up stories. New residents were attracted by our collaborative community spirit rather than intimidated by enforcement horror stories. The Heritage Festival became a model for neighborhood governance that emphasized cooperation over control. The broader impact exceeded anything I'd imagined. Jenny's story went viral on social media as David vs. Goliath, how one man's truck exposed HOA overreach. Other HOA reform movements cited Willowbrook as proof that residents could successfully challenge association overreach. Legal advocacy groups consulted with me about property rights education, and our case became a teaching example for law schools studying municipal oversight and private property boundaries. Practical takeaway: always research original property deeds when facing HOA disputes. Many associations claim authority they don't legally possess because no one bothers to verify their actual jurisdiction. Standing in my driveway this morning, watching kids play in the street garden grandfather's vision had made possible, I finally understood what he'd really built here. Not just roads and electrical systems, but a community foundation strong enough to survive petty tyrants and emerge more united than before. The October wind still carries the scent of autumn leaves, but now it also carries children's laughter and the sound of neighbors actually talking to each other instead of avoiding eye contact. True victory isn't defeating your enemies, it's transforming a community so that enemies become neighbors again. If you're dealing with HOA harassment, remember that knowledge is power and documentation is everything. Research your property rights, document every violation, and never let petty authority convince you that intimidation equals legitimacy. Drop a comment about your own HOA nightmare. I bet you have stories that would make Brenda's enforcement campaign look reasonable. Subscribe for more underdog victories against petty tyrants, and hit that bell for notifications when I drop the next revenge story. Next week, how I discovered my noisy neighbor was actually running an illegal business and what I did about it. Trust me, this one involves code enforcement, zoning violations, and a very surprised city inspector. Sometimes the best revenge is building something better for everyone, and always check those property deeds.